Aren't they making effective statements? Right? So we're getting them back to here. You know? Other thoughts? I think somebody else had their hand up or something.
Just going to say that when you ask why you're expecting like a rational reason for an irrational, often irrational behavior, and obviously if they really had a good why, they probably wouldn't have done it. You know, so
Yeah.
it's like when you ask people, well, why did you just hit your friend? Like I work with little kids.
Yeah.
Why did you just hit your friend? Well, obviously, like if I really had like a good reason, I probably wouldn't have done what I
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just because he was there within arm's range. And I thought it would be a cool thing to do. I thought we were playing Star Wars. He didn't realize. You know what I mean? And that was the only way I was going to be able to catch him. If I hit him first, you know what I mean? Like stuff like that. I think it's and you know, on the one hand, the one scenario, they just don't know why, right? On the other hand, they're so good at the game, they'll say, well, you know, I didn't grow up with my mom. You know, only had one pair of shoes. And you're there, and you were like, I'm gonna be a two with this guy, and then all of a sudden you're, oh, come here, little baby, and you know, I would have stole it too. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. You know, right? So we put ourselves in a position to even get manipulated. All right, so I'm gonna run through the rest of these small impromptu conference. These are the kind of breakaways, right? Sometimes with the folks that are involved, right? The one, two, three people. That are involved in a particular incident, we'll pull them away and we will actually engage in this together. So most of the time, the effective statements and the effective questions are done on an individual basis, right? This small impromptu conference is this process taking place among a few individuals together, okay, right? Often prompted by an incident or issue, okay, all right? From the context of foster care, maybe it's the siblings having issues inside of a particular home. And so you find out about it. So, hey, let's have this conversation in a circle, right? This is oftentimes a little bit more. And again, we're going from the most informal to the more formal. When I'm talking about more formal, I'm talking about the things that are to the right require more planning, more time, usually a few more people, okay? Sometimes more training as well, all right? We get to the group or circle, and this is a uniquely restorative practices thing or restorative justice. When you speak to anyone that's involved in restorative practices, it almost always comes around to about a circle. In fact, that's symbols that people use, right? So people kind of think restorative practices, we get in circles, you know, hold hands and all the other kind of, yeah, kumbaya and hippie stuff that people think that they do, right? I'm not that person, but the group or circle though is a real powerful thing, and without going into a lot of detail about it, it is the oldest, most ancient form of democracy that human beings have been able to come up with, right? Our ancient ancestors could find no other more democratic way to share warmth around a fire. I mean, think about it. Is there any other way for all folks to have the democratic closeness, proximity to a fire, right? So a circle is really, really powerful, right? It reminds us that there's no head, right? That a circle, everyone is kind of egalitarian. And I'm pretty dogmatic about the form of the circle, right? So a circle is better than an oval. An oval is better than a horseshoe. A horseshoe is better than an L, and an L is better than nothing, right? Because when we are in a circle together, it reminds us that all voices are equal. There's nothing obstructing our openness in terms of our body. It's very hard, and I've been in circles with people. It is very hard to whip out your cell phone when you're in a circle with people because people all look at you like, are you serious? Are you really just that rude in front of everybody right now? You know, and then there's a whole lot of processes in terms of going around sequentially or an open circle we call a non-go round, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so this is a really good way to take that and put it in a formalized process. And we have done, that's okay, we've done circles with 50 and 60 people. Um, in fact, in our school, oh, this is really good. In our school in Dover, we do restorative practices, and we have gotten so good at the restorative circle process that we have single gender classrooms. So we have all of our boys in single gender classrooms and girls. We have one guy who I think is a circle master, he has been able to have a school of alternative boys, right? He's had circles with about 30 boys, and the circle built such a high level of trust. I'm talking about the most challenging, the kids that regular school doesn't want, right? Such a high level of trust that they've been able to openly disclose sexual assault. We're talking about some of the most challenging, the most macho, the most hyper masculine boys who wouldn't dare show any kind of weakness in front of each other for fear of being punked or punched on a school bus, right? And they're opening up and actually sharing sexual trauma and assault. I mean, that's just powerful, right? So the Grouper Circle, and then the formal conference is is a highly structured event in dealing with harm. So it's a way that we have been able to pull families, pull issues together. For instance, with this issue that just happened, I keep going back to that because I didn't realize you guys got news from Delaware. Good for you. But more importantly, with this issue, right, we will do a formal conference, right, with the community, with our students. We've already done circle processes since Tuesday with our students, but we'll also do formal conferences so we can get to the harm. And hopefully we'll have victim and offenders there because we do not believe that not talking about problems will make them go away. We've got to have all the parties involved, and we're going to structure it so that we can have egalitarian. And we might wait a few days so that we don't have, people coming up there wearing hoods and stuff like that, and and what have you. But we are going to end up having that process. So does that make sense?
Right? I have a question for you.
Yes.
With the group, the circle that you talked about at your alternative school, I imagine there must have been some other work that was done prior to the boys going into a circle and being safe enough and feeling. There are some relationship things that have occurred.
There was some. Yeah, no. What's interesting is that we have a culture of openness, right? We have a culture of openness and a culture of collective strength, and that is embedded typically inside of a process we call community, right? Community is a town hall meeting every single day with every single student all together, right? So all of our students are in one room together typically, and we will go through three things. One is we will have shout outs, right? So that's where we're giving collective praise. Student to student, staff to student, student to staff. So everyone, right, is having an opportunity to praise. Mr. Jackson, you did an awesome math lesson yesterday. I finally understand fractions, right? Or, Alan, I really appreciated how you helped this other student out doing this or that, right? You cleaned toilets, and we really appreciated that, right? The second thing is we give humbles. And humbles is an opportunity for open and public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. And so this is an opportunity for a student or a staff member to stand up and acknowledge that they have done something wrong, apologize to the ones who have been hurt or harmed or offended, right? The power there is the courage that it takes to actually stand up and do that. And we model that. So the first person who ever gave a humble in our schools was me. So when we started this process, I stood up, I acknowledged that I had yelled at a student for doing something that he was not guilty for. And I can tell you that the jaws dropped. Because remember, I was a 2, right? So they were certainly used to me dropping the hammer and intimidation. And so for them to see me do this was pretty different, pretty unique. And then now we have it just as a normal basis. So staff give humbles, students give humbles, etc. And then we make some announcements, and then that's the third thing. So we embedded the circle process inside of the process we already had, right? But how long did it take? Not long, actually. Once we implemented the circle process, about 1 month before that level of disclosure happened. And the beautiful thing is that student was not out there by himself. I think a total of 3 students disclosed that day. And it wasn't even a circle on, hey, let's talk about sexual trauma. You know what I mean? It was. I don't even remember what the context of it was. Maybe you do, but
no, I don't. But I just want to do a disclaimer on this. I don't want people to walk away and think this is a natural thing that happens because it could be contraindicated for a student to disclose. So I mean, you hit it on the head. In a trauma-informed organization, if you're trauma-informed and you have training in being trauma-informed, then it's an appropriate atmosphere to do that. If you're not, that level of disclosure can actually be pretty dangerous. Because if someone doesn't know how to work with a student who discloses in that way, then it's contraindicated in a circle format for that to happen. So there's a lot of literature that's coming up on trauma-informed care and restorative practices and how to kind of blend those together. So I don't want you to think you just go circle up and those things, it's okay for those things to happen. You have to be very mindful. You have to be trained in this, but also your organization needs to be trained as a trauma-informed organization.
So we're balancing between what was best for the individual in order for that individual to be safe, right? And building inside of the collective the empathy so that that individual will be safe. And so what we had done at that point had, and surprised to us at least, had built the empathy inside of the collective so that the other students, the other boys, these challenging boys, weren't looking at the students saying, what? You got what? You know, that kind of, you know, laughing at him or anything. And then we were able to keep working with the student. So, yeah. Did you have something? Oh, okay. All right, go ahead, please. Yeah. Yeah. So that's an excellent question. So, we're mandated reporters, right? And you're really talking about, how does it affect therapeutic alliance, therapeutic rapport, right? And for me, it goes right back here. Christina does this extremely well, right? And we've downloaded a lot of issues together. So some students have disclosed things that she was mandated to report, right? And there were some real concerns around the relationship, and quite frankly, it kind of came out, that there was going to really be a challenge for her to keep an alliance with the student. But she came right back here, right, sitting with the student to say, this is a challenge for me. This is hard for me. But at the end of the day, I'm also I promise you that I'm going to do my very best to keep you safe. Right? And this is really hard for me. And I don't want to lose this relationship that we have. So really kind of going right back here to the effective students. And then sitting with the student in the discomfort. You know what I mean? Helping them to be comfortable in their discomfort and saying, where are you at right now? Let's talk this through. You know what I mean? Too often, though, we will mandate report and then almost act like we didn't.
Right.
You know what I mean? Please don't give my name to the family. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that that's not real. That is real. But, I think the way that you handled it before was really powerful and helpful. And the student came back around and was upset, but was able to work through some real issues. Okay. So again, I said I wasn't going to go into detail about this, and I know you're kind of thinking, well, Malik, you just touched on it. We didn't go into a lot of interventions. This is true because this wasn't restorative practice training, but I did want to at least introduce you to these things. These are all anchored inside of the with category. Okay. All right. So why don't we?
Yeah. So I think I was talking to Kathy because we have to get back on the road at 3:00. So I think what time do we have now?
About 2.
Okay, we got an hour. So what we thought we can do instead of breaking up into groups, since we probably don't have time to do all that, is just use this as an opportunity in an open way for you all to throw out cases and we can have just a discussion as a larger group. What do you all think about that? Okay. So in the format would be pretty much come up with a case and think about how can we utilize some of these things that we talked about today, right? So let's get in the business of talking about some cases.
Yeah.
Okay.
You see how?
Yes.
She's ready.
We have a family, has 3 individuals here, or 3 kids in there, older boys, 2 girls. It came out around Christmas time that the older one had ended up molesting the 2 younger girls. And we've been dealing with this with the family and put in all these different kinds of services to help out everybody. However, behaviors are to the max now where 2 of the children are now involved with, or one was involved with DJS. Now the second one is involved with DJS. The one that was the perpetrator is out of the home in a RTC, and the other one just got placed in DJS. And due to her acting out and behaviors and what's going on with her. So we have multi companies, departments involved in this case. We're all working together to try to provide the best care we can to this family, and it just seems to be getting worse for these kids. Now the third one is destroying classrooms, is just,
when she's asked to do something, she doesn't want to do it, she rips up the papers and gets sent to, ISI probably about twice a week. She's been suspended from school all the other time. So all three of them are just, they're, I don't even know how to say it, like they're kind of like at the end of trying to help these guys out and what we can give to this family so
Right.
that there is no more disruption.
And share with the family stuff.
Well, before you share, let me just understand. So there's one kid molested the two siblings?
Yeah.
Okay, and now, so there's three kids,
Yeah.
and they're all in different environments.
Yes, as of right now, the youngest one is in the home with the parents still. The
Okay.
other one was just removed, the other girl was just removed recently, and the son was removed back in when this ended up coming out and happening back in December.
Okay, and so the family structure piece you were going to talk about.
Family structure, both mom and dad are intellectually challenged, and they, to the best of their abilities, I believe, try, but are not very forthcoming of what's going on exactly in the house. It took one of the kids reporting this in school for this to happen. They never said a word, and the parents are ones that caught the boy doing this. So they're very close. They've had a lot of services in and out of their homes in that kind of aspect. They're very limited in transportation. They're limited in resources, and I don't know, Renee, if you wanted to add more to it.
No, I mean, this thing is just coming.
Okay.
Mom is also very optimistic as well. Her two older children who are adults were not integrated. And she's also overwhelmed with trauma.
Yeah. Right, so mom had some sexual trauma background. We don't know about dad, her husband.
He was also, as a teenager, placed in a treatment, detained, I don't know what detainment, but he was in a group home, when he was a teenager also. So he grew up in the system.
So he was in the system, yeah. Yeah, that's what statistics say, right? You grow up in the system, and then you have children that end up in the system, right? And it's funny, Kathy and I were just talking about this, that, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right?
Right.
So if there's mental health problems with the parents, you're going to see the problems with the children. Just so I understand again, the parents knew that the older kid was doing this, but they never did anything about it. They never said anything. Right? Okay.
Not until it was reported to the teacher by the one who will, to this day, still say that nothing was done to her by him. But it was indicated in the doctor reports that she had been sexually abused.
And what's the reason that the parents didn't say anything?
Maybe just fear of getting in trouble. I don't know, fear of being blamed.
Or their family separating and all
Maybe,
this.
having the family separated, having.
Yeah.
Mom's trauma, I think, supports her. Their mother has been through her own trauma, to observe this going on in her home, kind of forces her to look at her trauma. And so by turning a blind eye, and she doesn't think about it, she kind of put it away. Maybe that was part of it.
Yeah.
She was very unthankful for her.
So talking about it brings up all the uncomfortable stuff. Yeah. So what's the question? What the hell do you do with that, right?
And I think, as you can tell, we're all
involved in it.
Yeah, we're all enmeshed in this, and we're all trying very hard to stick together as a community, along with being with the family, and trying to help these people get to where they need to be successful, so that no more children are taken away from or taken out of the family dynamic and put into a different dynamic. Have to deal with that trauma also,
Right.
And the one that has been placed is and is just not handling it well at all. So I guess the question is where do you go from there? If anybody else in another, our community has been dealing with this, for a while now, and we all keep going back to each other. Okay, well, what can we do else? What else can we do?
Is the family getting is there any family therapy going on?
Yeah.
Okay. What's the form of therapy that they're multi-systemic therapy or? But they come into the home. They're coming into the home and they're doing work. Okay. So I don't know if there's an easy answer, because this is something that's not going to be healed overnight, right? There's a lot of trauma. There's chronic history of trauma in the family. That's a generational type of trauma that trauma, and the parents just didn't have the ability or the skill set to handle it, right? When you really want to deal with trauma, you have to be educated on what is the problem, and then you have to have the skill set to deal with the problem. That's basic human therapy. If you do evidence-based therapy, you first talk about psychoeducation. What is it that you're experiencing? Even with little ones, there's ways you can do it that's appropriate for their age group. And then you have to arm them with a skill set. So we're dealing with a family that's not skilled, right? We're dealing with a family that has a lot of shame and guilt, I think. I don't know all the details, so you guys tell me if I'm wrong. So it's not something that's going to happen. It sounds like you're doing everything that needs to happen. Family therapy is absolutely important. It's important that the children, when they're involved in agencies or involved in agencies where staff members know about how to deal with trauma. So I know I keep throwing out this trauma-informed care thing because we're partnering with the National Council, but that's really important because we can do harm to our children and youth if we're providing the wrong interventions for them, right? And that's why we can't just say one size fits all. Like, even though we talk about some things, you don't say, well, let's go and do a circle, right? Or you don't say they need to do trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy because you have to find something that fits. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So the organizations have to be trauma-informed. I don't know if your organizations have had training in being trauma-informed. Yes. Okay. And so with the agencies are armed with that, and all I can anticipate is that this is going to be a long, protracted journey because of the chronicity of that trauma.
Yeah, just to add, I think it is one challenge that I have with therapy is it can often just be individual based, right? So we take the individual outside of the collective, right? Not saying that we should blame society for one's ills, right? We got to start somewhere, right? And in this case, working with just the family, certainly working with the individuals, we need to work with the family, right? But working even just with the family might not be enough. What we need to do, and I'm sure you guys have already done it, is look at where is their community of care, right? Their community of support, right? So maybe it's other kinship, right? I don't know. Maybe it's not, right? And sometimes, certainly it was in my family, right? It wasn't extended family. I have no uncles, no aunts, no cousins. I didn't grow up like that. My grandparents did, so I didn't have that. But what I certainly had was some play uncles. I certainly had some play aunts. I had some really good friends of my parents that acted as that. And so what we might need to do is see what we can do about leveraging that system of support, right? Who's the best friend of the father? Hopefully he doesn't have intellectual disabilities too, right? Maybe so, right? They found each other in the world. And Salisbury's not even that big, right? Or Eastern Shore's not even that big, right? But they found each other in the world, but that's okay. But who's the best friend of the mother, right? What are other, who has connections there? That if we were called upon in an emergency crisis to say who cares for this family in some way, maybe there's some voices out there that have more of a meaning and impact than we do.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it needs to be done in a way that, of course, maintains the integrity and dignity of the family. So we don't put everybody's business out there, but almost like an intervention to some degree. You know what I mean? So if this is not working, we need to go here. That's not working, we need to go here. All the time, doing more and more intense work inside. If that makes sense. And I don't know if it's helpful.
So kind of building up the social support system,
I have a question, like, especially because the mother has her own trauma, I think she probably has a hard time recognizing what is appropriate, and what's not, because her normal might not be our normal. And I would think that you would have to start with her and do some intent. She gets her own, and what kind of therapy is she getting? Because if in fact she races the trauma, what's the best kind of therapy for a person who has had a traumatic event?
Well, there's different kinds of therapy. You could jump in. There's something called EMDR.
I've heard that that's very good.
EMDR is considered an evidence-based treatment. I don't know as much about that. I haven't been trained in it. Have you been trained in
I've been
EMDR?
trained in.
So you've run, I'll let you speak to that.
And I did jump in.
Yeah.
I have a little bit of different perspective, but what I want to say is, in addition to what they're saying, which I think is absolutely appropriate, I think think what I'm saying is they might disagree with me, but we can do that. What trauma does in childhood is blocks the ability for children to gain the skills that they need to deal with life, to cope with life. And so, for me, what comes before trauma therapy? I would not even approach trauma therapy before I felt like the various family members had reached a level of maturity where they were able to do talk therapy, whether it's CBT or whatever. And so family therapy is good, and you can do some very structured things. But number two is talking about a very long period of time, but you're also talking about very complex issues. So if they're doing family therapy once a week, it's not enough. You've got to have multiple therapies for multiple members of the family, multiple times per week, and you've got to have developmentally appropriate.
That's okay.
You've got to have some way to measure the level of skills and help these people strengthen their skills to deal with problem solving, communication, and especially if they're intellectually challenged.
Well,
Yeah.
and
It's
they
a whole different ballgame with
right,
that.
and emotionally challenged. His mom's first sexual incident, she was only 13 when she had her first child, and that's really where she is.
Right, exactly.
So that's, and so we don't disagree. I think that's why you guys, yeah, it's not a one size fits all approach. You know, even some evidence-based treatments are contraindicated for people based on certain things that they're bringing in. And you have to be mindful of where they are in the stage. So I totally agree with you about that. So that's why I say it's a long, protracted struggle. That's not something that's going to change overnight. Because it's absolutely right. Mom may not even be ready to go into it. I can't talk about EMDR, but cognitive processing therapy or prolonged exposure therapy. She may not have the skill set, right? Because we talk about what trauma is it's so pervasive and so chronic, you don't even have the ability to cope with that. You have to have some really good coping skills to deal with exposure-based therapy. Because you're just talking about some really difficult stuff.
And then there's that whole thing with the brain and the impact it has on brain development. And she was 13.
Right.
So, and the kids obviously are younger. And so there's all kinds of ramifications there too.
Right.
And the emotional vocabulary is almost at zero with the two. You know, they can recite back to you everything that they have been learning, but to actually put it into effect when they're starting to hit these emotions, it can't all behavioral.
Right.
It's everything that's coming out behavioral. And even just to be proactive to try to help them get through that, because working with the schools, because this is where the main issues are coming is at schools, you know, and trying to work with the schools to try to help them, you know, okay, well, if you see this starting to happen, to try to de-escalate the situation, how about we remove her from the classroom so that it's not being done in front of all the kids, you know, and trying to get to that point has been pretty difficult, you know, in getting her, because they're very impulsive.
Well, again, then
They'll
we
come out of nowhere.
deal with multiple systems too.
Yeah.
It's really confusing at times, right? If everyone isn't at the same level with their knowledge set. You know, so I think that goes back to what Malika's talking about when you talk about bringing in the community. But when we talk about educational system, we have many folks in the educational system who don't know anything about it. Right? And, you know, the reason we find a lot of our kids are being removed from public schools and being sent to alternative school settings is because the school has not done their job in providing good behavioral health care.
Right.
And that really is their responsibility, right? There's a responsibility there to provide that and be armed with the skills to do that. We find that in the work that we often have to do is our therapists have to go out into the schools and provide training to teachers on how do you deal with kids who have these externalizing or acting out behaviors. And what is trauma and what's bipolar disorder and some of these things, and helping them with some intervention. So they don't know, and it's not because they don't want to help. You know, sometimes it's just they don't know what to do. It's not scary when you see all this stuff, right?
Right. I think Somerset is a little bit different than a lot of the other counties because we are all in there with each other. Like we're everybody tends to know. There's a lot of talking. I mean, especially when I talk with everybody in the school, so we have a very good relationship in that way. It's just trying to help these kids, like what you're saying, grabbing outside community people, ones that we weren't even thinking about, like best friends or card people that come in and play cards with them at night. You know, it's not even thinking about that because we're like, okay,
Well,
that's appropriate.
Building connections.
Great.
here's what two things that I think are important. The latter is really important in terms of finding their community of support, right? Because that helps to break down the stigma around mental health, right? So we know, hopefully you know, around the cultural stigma around mental health, especially in minority or non-white communities and poor communities, right? I can be many things, but don't say that I'm crazy.
That's right.
Okay.
You know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with my mind.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's something wrong with my pocketbook, but there's nothing wrong with my mind, right?
Mhm.
The other thing is though that with a high-end user like the high user, right, like this, because the family is a high user, right, of services, is the stigma associated with them, right? That's the O'Malley clan of crazies over there. O'Malley, that was apropos for Maryland too, right? Right? But that's the O'Malleys over there, and they're crazy. And that clan is, all those children coming through have issues. You know what I mean? And the stigma that's associated with that. And it may not be the agencies involved, but it certainly could be with other adults. You know what I mean? And like, oh my God, you got one of those in your classroom or something like that. You know what I mean? So we need to really be careful. And I think that's where we dig also into the asset, and we're building on strengths and resiliency instead of deficiencies. You know what I mean? Because most of our work is centered around filling deficiencies as opposed to building on assets.
What would that look like trying to go out and bring those friends in to be a support?
Yeah.
And what does that look like?
Yeah.
I mean, really in confidentiality and
Right.
what does that really look like
Yeah.
in the room?
Yeah, so there's a process called the family group decision making, right? And restorative practices does it, and what it looks like is to some degree an intervention. So FGDM, I think is what it's called. But a family is in crisis, right? There's been domestic violence or so in the household, right? Or a child is at risk of being taken out of home, right? And so the social worker who's assigned to that particular case or agencies or whatever else will meet with the family, right? Perhaps the one family member, the father or so, is out of the home. Maybe he's living somewhere else. He's facing charges, something like that, right? And so you're meeting with him and saying, would you be open to having a structured conversation with your family, other agencies that are involved, and other people of support, right? To try to work and develop an action plan for the family that you all develop, right? Yeah, I'll be willing to do that. I just want to get my family back. You know what I mean? And I'm not a bad guy and da-da-da. Okay, who's your person that could support you? Do you have somebody that's, not necessarily on your side, but do you have somebody that you really kind of lean on and cares about you? Yeah, my brother John does. Well, would you be open for me contacting him and inviting him to something like that, right? And now I've got the offender, right? And I go to the victims, perhaps, and I do the same thing. And I'm asking for their support, and I'm contacting all of those folks, right? And then I'm structuring that. And it's a long, drawn-out process, and you have to be trained in it and things like that. But then you're structuring that meeting. And in that meeting, you've got that community of care and support. And your role is really to help foster the conversation and then leave. And allow the family and their community of support to work a plan. And you are invited back into the room once they have developed that plan. And you go through the plan with them, making sure that it has met all of the obligations that outsiders have. Maybe the court has things about, it has to be in anger management, or the school has this, or, whatever. You make sure that it's hit all of those areas, and this is a plan that the collective agrees upon. Because this is really about family empowerment, and this is really where you're getting those who have skin in the game to actually develop it itself. You provided them with the resources, with the skills, right? Then you leave. This is written into law in New Zealand. Every family that is faced with an issue of out-of-home placement must go through this process. It is written into law. So that's why I looked at Mike Doolin, right, where he says family empowerment, that's not how we do it, this process, that's not what it's based upon. So in New Zealand, it's written in the law. And this came from the Maori, the indigenous folks in New Zealand, felt that their children were disproportionately placed in foster care, right? And out of home placement and juvenile detention. And they said, this is not consistent with our culture. In our culture, when our children act up, we come together as a community. And so we are requiring you, if you're here in our country, we're requiring you to do the same kind of thing. And so you make it into law. So that's what they've done. So
of
the
course,
family group dynamic.
so yeah, so I was gonna just add to that. So of course, this is something you have to be trained in. You know, it's not just something you can come and do. Because you're right, there's confidentiality issues, and with our training, you know, we have to be mindful of those things. But what it plays upon is this idea of building connection. And we know that in many research studies, when we talk about emotional distress or emotional disorders, we know that social support is really predictive of better outcomes. So really saturating or arming our families with the right level of support. But what Malik is talking about is something that we train on. So don't go in and
But also, I mean, you know, we're talking about people that care about each other, right? And so, you know, I think, you know, now I'm a rebel when it comes to systems, right? But I think that we hide sometimes behind this issue of confidentiality and everything else. I think, you know, if we're asking who's important in your life and are you allowing them to be involved in this process? Yes, I am allowing them. I'll sign the waiver allowing us to talk about our stuff in front of them, right? Okay, we'll come onto the table and now we've got ourselves covered, because sometimes we hide behind confidentiality. I'm not saying you are. I'm not saying that at all. But sometimes we hide behind confidentiality just as a CYA. You know what I mean? Let me just cover myself to make sure that I didn't violate any kind of law. But in situations like this, everybody's agreeing to be there, you know. So we're open.
When I think of a foster care specifically and trauma, and I've been doing foster care for on and off for 6 years, reactive attachment disorder comes off so frequently and it's such a impediment to treatment because it's I wrote it down so I knew what I was talking about.
You know, what is reactive attachment disorder? I'm not familiar with it.
Reactive attachment disorder is when you are moved from home to home to home, because it's cliche that you're bounced around from home to home to home, but it happens.
Yeah.
And every time you're bounced into another home, you are less inclined to make a connection with the next foster parent because
Down the line.
2, 3, 12, 19 have thrown me out. So one of the first things you said when you started speaking was about the 3 characteristics of post-traumatic stress, and the third one is numbing.
Yeah, emotional numbing. Yeah.
I have, I don't want to call it a universal aspect, but it's so prevalent in the kids that I work with because they are the most difficult kids to have in the community. So if you have a reactive attachment disorder kid who doesn't trust that the next foster parent won't reject them, they're convinced they'll be rejected. So they're going to reject you first. They're going to sabotage the placement. I'm going to test you. I'm going to find out what of your buttons is it that's going to kick me out. Can I set fire to a mattress?
Yeah.
No, you didn't throw me out. Well, that's not the only card I have in my deck.
Yeah, I got some more
What
coming.
if I key your car? No, that didn't do it. What if I curse out your sainted mother? And you've thrown out all my clothes in a garbage bag on the side of the road and said, Mr. Mark, come pick them up. You
Right.
cursed out my sainted mother. So if you have a child who is developing this numbness from trauma, it impedes the effectiveness of empathy. They're not going to understand or want empathy. They're not going to want remorse. They're not going to want emotional connectivity with their foster parent or foster parent number 6, foster parent number 7, because you're going to burn me again. So when I'm trying to work with reactive attachment kids, and mine usually get separated into 2 categories. There are the ones who treat their foster homes like a business transaction. You want me to go to school for 5 days this week? What tangibly are you going to give me on Friday for going to school every day because I want an MP3 player, I want an iPod? It's not, I'll be walk up to someone and this is your new foster parent, mommy, and they hug you and no, I'm sorry, I'm your caseworker. This is you're my mommy. They to an outside observer, oh, what an adorable 10-year-old
Yeah.
who just loves the world. And no, there are no boundaries. He's willing to give everything away. And this is one is a 10-year-old boy. The other one is a 14-year-old girl who confuses sexual favors to her boyfriend as he will love me in return.
Yeah.
This outside of role modeling using effective statements and teaching them how to develop an emotional vocabulary. Outside of doing as best as foster parents can of in having felt safety, felt security. It's one thing to tell a foster child, oh, we're going to keep you. We're going to be the difference. We're going to be the ones who persevere and stick it out. But talk is cheap.
Yeah.
The best you can do is help a new child feel as safe and secure as you can. And of course, the worst part is time is necessary to reinforce this. Time needs to pass in order for an attachment to be developed. What can be done by a foster parent? Because all these kids go to therapists. All these kids go to multiple therapists, individual therapists, trauma therapists, school therapists. What can foster parents do to connect to kids who are
kind of testing them or having these reactions that we're talking about? And you know, Kathy, you may want to jump in on this one too, but let me just say my first reaction then when you're talking about kids moving and being moved around 6 times, that's just not right. I mean, you know, it's just, that's trauma in and of itself, right? So, you know, and there's a reaction I have with that, right? And imagine if any one of us in this room had that experience. Imagine, you know? I mean, I could probably end up doing some of the same stuff. I'm not feeling safe. I don't feel secure. And if I'm being tossed around, what does that mean about my value? This person might simply a means to an end. You know, when you get tired of me, you could be, you know, you're uncomfortable, then I have to move around. But how about my discomfort, right?
As soon as I become inconvenient to you, it
Yes.
gets that bad.
Right. Well,
As soon as I'm an inconvenience.
right. So it makes us, so imagine how that might feel. That's why I started with the experiential exercise of just the handshake, right? We get uncomfortable with just doing a handshake or sometimes just talking about our feelings. But imagine if you had to experience multiple forms of trauma. That's why I talked about polyvictimization. So I have to just say, and we know that it's not right. That should not happen. And shame on the system that we're in a system where that does happen. But I understand that, you know, those things happen, okay? It looks like, Kathy, you were going to...
I was just going to say what you're seeing is a normal reaction to an
Yeah.
abnormal situation.
Yeah.
Any of us would
Would
do the same thing if we're passed around from family to family.
And the reality is we don't even have to say that it's passed around from family to family. I know some 40 and 50-year-olds that have had 6 bad relationships. And they're like, man, ain't nothing. I can't stand it. Right? I'm not going to give them the time of day. You know what I mean? And these are adults, and they're looking for love. You know what I mean? But you know, it doesn't even have to be, you know, family to family. And so what would we expect of a 10-year-old?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So they've got a short history, but in you know, in their life, that's most of their life. So, but it's got a short history of just the same kind of thing. And they've developed this idea of, I'm not going to give my heart to them. And they've set tests of security, and rightly or wrongly, these families have not passed their tests, as dysfunctional as those tests are. So I'm going to do this to see if you love me, and am I still going to be around? I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and you have failed. Now those tests are completely wrong, and they're bad, and you know, and what can we expect? How much could one family endure? You know what I mean? But in their mind, they failed. And so I get passed on to the next one. And now the tests are going to be even harder because I've got a history of failure.
And just to put the test in perspective, often these tests are in service of trying to feel safe. Yeah. Right? So the test is the mechanism to try to feel safe. So I'm going to test you because I need to protect myself. So it's how do I feel safe? You know, sometimes, you know, so it's really important for us to understand, and I don't think we ask this enough in the work we do, but what makes you feel safe? What makes you feel safe? Because our children are responding to uncomfortable feelings that, again, are normal reactions to abnormal circumstances. But we have to start to understand them and work with them. If they're being tossed around and moved around, they're going to continue to behave in that way because they are trying. to figure out, how do I feel safe? How do I feel secure? There's no stability in my world. I don't, and remember, we talked about the concepts related to trauma. Is that how you see yourself changes, how you see the world changes, how you see other change. And when you're little, you're still even developing that concept of the world. So then at a very young age, the world is a very dangerous place, and you can't trust people. And trust is like the most important thing we can have, right? Trust and safety.
So to your point, again, I'm sort of going beyond the people that we traditionally look for, is with these children is identifying who has a connection with them in their life, right? Maybe it's just a really good friend from the old neighborhood, got to leverage positive relationships, right? But as opposed to a negative one. But what you're really trying to figure out is, I'm not seeing a connection between this child and the foster family, even though they're trying as best as they can, and we're working with them to try to do all of these things, but they're still not making the connection. What we need to look at is, what does connection look like for this individual? And we do that by going to those that they have a connection with, who has an emotional connection with them, helping to understand what that looks like. How do they act when they're around someone that really cares about them, or they perceive cares about them? And then we begin to dissect and understand, okay, what do I need to do in order to kind of begin to replicate some of that? Or leverage that person to help build a relationship with you. Some of my best friends were introduced to me by other best friends. You know what I mean? Because there's trust there. You know what I mean? And so they were able to kind of foster the relationships.
That's true. But that's also, that's not a universal, that's like nothing. It's a luxury.
Yeah.
Because most of them would have that self-trust with the parent who was
Right.
inept or unable to
Right.
care for them and
That's right.
lost them initially out of neglect.
Yes.
Although
It's not bi-directional.
No,
Yeah, I
no.
agree.
But so foster, whoever they have maintained a positive connection with.
Yeah.
Maintain that connection no matter I'm assuming you can't always maintain that connection if that parent, for instance, is a negative influence. If
Right.
that parent is an addict.
The qualifier is positive. Right? And so, for instance, one of the 40 developmental assets says this person has a positive person, or has a person in their life that cares about them and loves them and is positive.
Yeah.
Right? And when I get into conversations with people that don't check that box for the children that we're talking about, I tell them it's because you don't know that child. Right? And my experience has been, most children have someone in their life that is relatively positive and cares deeply about them. It may not be someone they live with. It may be Big Mama who lives in Alaska. It may be Uncle something who's the youth minister. But there's somebody in their life. We just got to figure out who that is, delve deep enough, and try to leverage that. And if, Lord have mercy, there is no one, then you have now just stepped into that role.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And I agree with that. That was the comment I was going to make. Sometimes the therapist becomes that person. And even if you can't stay with that child forever, if you can be there for a length of time and develop that level of trust, then you become that person.
It is in their ability to develop trust.
Absolutely. So I think the idea here is hyper-focusing on strengthening a connection. It could be even one connection is a good connection. Sometimes, they say if you have one good friend, you're good because you have one good friend. So one good person in your life is very impactful in a positive way. So strengthening whatever that connection is. So I was going to say the same thing in the absence of having some of these folks identified in that immediate relationship, building and strengthening that relationship. Because again, when we talk about trauma-informed care, we talk about the sense of safety. Forming connections is really, really important, positive connections, because that interpersonal piece is effective. It's impacted. You don't feel safe. It's hard to connect with others. And then, dealing with the emotional regulation piece. How do you regulate, your feelings as a result of the world changing and not being safe, and you're not trusting people and having issues with intimacy and all those kinds of things. So it seems hard when as you describe it, but if you can focus on a connection to enhance, then that's something. And even with that, it's going to take some work, right? None of these things are things that happen overnight.
Not overnight.
gonna say quickly, a concern too is that that person though, who may not be a foster parent, when you said, you know, that relationship can be leveraged, sometimes it's taken literally, and that person becomes the reward system. Well, you skipped school today. You're not gonna get to go to respite to see Miss Tammy because I know how much you like Miss Tammy.
Yeah.
And so, or
Yeah.
you're not gonna get to play basketball because your arms.
I have
Yeah.
to jump in. We cannot let people do that
Yeah.
to children. One solid relationship can heal them, and you cannot use that as reward and punishment. If there's anything we do in our social services system, do not let your foster parents do that. It is so wrong.
And because here's why, right? Here's why. Because they are operating in the 2 and the 4, right? We correct it by making them be in the with. So if Miss Tammy is the reward, then I'm doing the reward with Miss Tammy. So you're not going to the circus with Miss Tammy by yourself. We're going together, right? Because I want to build the association, right? Scaffold the association that good things happen, not just with Miss Tammy, and I'm the 2 person, and she's the 4. But we're together, and I know that's sacrificing time and and effort and all that stuff,
Yeah.
But I mean, but that's how we develop the relationship. You know what I mean? So,
Does that answer? Does that help?
My brain's already churning. I'm already writing down.
Good.
So thank you.
Good.
I was just gonna say, and I work with, on the flip side of things, when, like you said, you cannot let foster parents do that, but on the flip side of things, we have to educate them to make sure that whoever they're thinking of as their safe person that they might go to weekly or go, to respite, somebody that they're forming a relationship with, that person understands as well that if the kid's in trouble at school, then the same consequences need to occur with their person that they're forming a healthy relationship with that would at home, so that it doesn't become, oh, I'm running away, who's my favorite person, and we're gonna go beach all weekend.
Right. Or that whole splitting thing. Yeah.
It has to be a unified front and not belong for the foster care. So sometimes it's just
Well, consistency is really right.
yeah.
Yeah.
In the black and white world of youth, right? It's easier to allow rewards to be embodied inside of one person, right? Mama gets me what I want, right? And Baba holds me to task. It's so much easier that way. You know what I mean? And so that's why it really is an important thing that they have to walk together in upholding the expectations and also with doling out the rewards. Yeah. Because otherwise one will force the other to be a 2 and the other to be a 4. You know? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. That's the science of it, right?
Right.
It's getting that consistency between those parties.
Other questions, other thoughts?
So I work with a number of people who were in foster care and now they're adults and now their kids are in foster care. They've done something to lose their kids. In working with those individuals for reunification, what are kind of the best points that you could suggest in talking to them about their experience in foster care and how it's shaped them to be in the point that they're at now?
So I would ask, what kinds of things have you talked about with them?
A lot of it's skills, developing their communication skills, communicating, developing those kind of adult, skill sets, management, things like that. Exploring, past traumas, things like that. But I was just curious if you guys had anything that I haven't thought of or what your this is.
Well, I think here's the gift, and it's hard to say it's a gift when something like this happens, but the gift is that the foster parent knows what it's like, right? To go through that. And there's a gift to that because then there's something, a common language you can have a discussion with them about because it's not like it's foreign to them. They've been through it. So I think having that conversation about what their feelings were, talking about the communication, talking about how to build upon the strength of their own family and the child and those kinds of things, I think it gives you kind of a common language to have that conversation. And all the other things that we talked about. I mean, I'm gonna say again, talking about building connections, talking about safety, talking about the coping skills. I don't know what else there is to add. I might be missing something.
But I think to add on is also that a lot of it is rooted inside of shame, right? That there's shame that's going on there. When the parent comes up to the school or to the agency is acting out, you shouldn't treat my child like this or whatever. You guys, I mean, there's a lot of shame there,
Yeah.
And so for someone who has lived through foster care, and then for the ones their children, because I guarantee you that they made promises to themselves and probably verbally to others that I'm not going to give my children up, and I'm not going to be the kind of parent that my parent was, and they failed them. You know what I mean? And there's shame inside of that, And so I think realizing where the shame is and empowering them with the language, effective statements again, to be able to communicate that to their own children. You know what I mean? Out of that can foster this shared experience and then create something even more beautiful. So, but you got to work through the shame. The shame doesn't always look like shame, like sorrow, head down. The shame can look like aggressiveness. You know what I mean? So, yeah. And who are you to tell me? Yeah. But the shame, I think. Other thoughts?
Anything else? It's quiet.
Mark, when I hear what you say, I've said several STEM meetings or school meetings, and just comparing foster parents or adoptive parents or potential career parents being frustrated with the type of thing that you're talking about, the reactive attachment. And I think when you talk about the 2 and the 4, they get into it because they want to get back, or to kind of parent another child, or you think of they just get bombarded with so many things, and they become a more authoritative role, and so it becomes a pull and push thing. And I just wonder if there's some way that we could have some kind of specialized support for that adoption or foster parent. Because I think when they are having that situation, it brings up a lot of stuff for them as well, that they could use some extra support and know what to expect and how to stand in it.
Absolutely. Is that a question or just a comment?
Just a comment.
Yeah.
Just a comment.
Absolutely.
Because I see it.
Yeah.
A lot.
Like a lot of positive reinforcement and then consequences that is punishment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And working on that, and we don't have a lot for them.
Yeah. I see it a lot.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too earlier. Yeah.
And oftentimes what I hear the parents say, they have no idea. While their record was maybe disclosed, it's one thing to read, okay, this child's mom locked them in the closet, didn't see them. It's one thing to get that type of information. It's another thing to understand or to see firsthand the result of that. On a regular basis. So oftentimes what I hear the foster parents say, the meetings I've been in, is that they had no idea. And then what I hear Solaire saying is, okay, once they realize that, what kind of training can they get? What ongoing training and support? What's available to them? And that's probably a question for the community as a whole and different agencies. But yeah.
It is, but I would say to both you and Mark that if you have a child with attachment problems, reactive attachment disorder, that child and those foster parents need to be in therapy, in family therapy together with someone that understands attachment issues and can guide them in terms of not taking it personally, methods of child care, methods of discipline, and things that will help strengthen that family and give the foster parents some stress reduction. But that is the service that we really need in this area.
Well, I can speak as far as
newer foster parents that take on a difficult child, they are automatically paired with a more experienced foster parent that has been through or is currently going through similar behaviors and issues. This way, it is not DSS coming in and saying, here's what you need to do, because we're not living it on a day-to-day basis, and they don't respect the opinion most times. But if you're going to be paired with someone that has been through it from the get-go with a child that's similar to one that they are currently working with, they're more receptive to working with that, and it also gives the built-in support to that foster family. Maybe you need respite. Here's someone I'm already familiar with. Here's someone the child is familiar with. Maybe they're starting to get a mentorship with that family. And that is working a lot better than an authoritative figure coming in and saying, why don't you try that?
Because in the absence
Good
of
point.
that authority, the person is those two groupings are able to walk with each other. It's much easier to be with, when you take the authority out. So, Christine and I have to escape, but I wanted to provide you with our contact information. So I'm just going to kind of call it out there. So again, my name is Malik, and my last name is Malik is M-A-L-I-K, and my last name is Muhammad, M-U-H-A-M-M-A-D. And my email is just M from Malik and then Muhammad. So M Muhammad, again, M-U-H-A-M-M-A-D, at ProvCorp, that's PROVCORP.com. So Muhammad at ProvCorp.com. And
So I would be really easy because since you have the address, I'm Christina Watlington, but it's CWATLINGTON, same ending.
at ProvCorp.com. And our number is 302-573-5073. Yeah, 302-573-5073. I give you my cell and home address, but you might give it to some reporters. That issue.
All right, well, thank you for having us come out today. You enjoy hanging out?
We also said there's some snacks and refreshments. If we could just take a break and then come back and just wrap up for the day.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank
It's been good hanging out. Thank you for having us come down. I definitely want to stay in contact and talk to you about some of the things we've been talking about. Wonderful. I think we can kind of collaborate.
Presentation.
Thank you.
Me too. Okay.
I don't know, maybe Kathy, right?